One of New Zealand's big targets as part of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals is to dramatically reduce our food waste in multiple parts of our supply chain as well. The New Zealand government is certainly putting a focus on that, as was highlighted at the recent New Zealand Food Waste Summit. And the New Zealand government is looking to put some leadership in this area, as well as focus as part of the Parliamentary's Environmental Committee, focusing on how it could be part of our wider climate change goals just as much as feeding our most vulnerable. Speaking at the New Zealand Food Waste Summit was Bay of Plenty's Labour MP Angie Warren Clark, who's ran a local food rescue organisation known as Good Neighbour Food Rescue herself. And when she went into Parliament in 2017, it was hot on her agenda as a way to be able to improve our environment and feed the hungry. Her work has been reflected in a $32 million government fund to support nationwide food distribution initiatives. And Angie joins us now. Angie, it's incredible to see the work of our members of Parliament be in areas of their passions. Can you please set the scene on how you became so passionate about food waste and food rescue?
Well, thanks for having me, Sarah. I think the first thing I should say is I didn't actually run a food rescue organisation. I was running Tauranga Women's Refuge, and we were one of the first two recipients of the of Good Neighbour Food Rescue. And they were just setting up at the time and thinking about all of this food waste that was happening at a supermarket level, thinking about how to go about moving that out into the community. And so they thought of ourselves and a local childcare organisation. And of course, as the manager of refuge, I had to fundraise money for the food for the families that we had in the refuge. And so of course I was really excited to be selected. And that was the beginning of an amazing relationship. So our organisation, we ran a safe house, and that safe house, the families needed to go to food bank or they needed to get food grants in order to be able to have food. Obviously, they'd come into refuge, it was a crisis situation, they couldn't go into the community, and they're often without real resources. So the way that we worked is that they would have a shelf in the fridge, and they would have a shelf in the pantry, and we would have some staples, but that was really it. And they would have to buy everything. And of course, meat was expensive. Toilet paper was a major issue, because if you have 4 families living in a house and there's little kids, they don't know enough to say, well, that's mum's toilet paper. So they're always using each other's toilet paper, and a lot of conflict happened because of that. Not enough resources, so a lot of conflict. So when Good Neighbour Food Rescue came in, they transformed our organisation. We had food in the pantries, the freezer, the lot. We were just so blessed. There was food, there was amazing food. A lot of the organic and very expensive items of food that hadn't sold at supermarket, and they were good enough to eat but not good enough to sell. So these were often things like, say, Rochefoucaults that had a cracked packet or something like that. So our families got to have some wonderful food. It was cleaning products, it was everything, and toiletries, the lot. It transformed us and enabled us to support our families in such a huge way.
It must have been such an incredible insight into how much food is wasted.
Look, I was gobsmacked, to be honest. When we first started, it was a box or 2, but it started to be that we would have 6 to 7 boxes twice a week, and we were able to support our community clients as well. So those were the families that were not in refuge, but they would have a police call out or something, and so we would ring them and say, hey, look, we hear that something's happened for you. look, we have all this food that we need to keep moving, and we were wondering if we could call round with a food parcel and perhaps have a chat. And that was the entrance into many families' lives, which was wonderful. But bread. We quickly learnt that we didn't need to take all the bread. We didn't need to take. There was always bread, so we got to the point where we ourselves were making sure we weren't wasting food as well.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah, it was really important.
And I know that we'll be catching up with Waste Minimalisation Manager Francesca Goodman-Smith later in the show from Foodstuffs, who talks a lot about the wastage in bread, which is absolutely incredible. Angie, moving into Parliament, how have you been able to progress this conversation on food waste and secure this $32 million fund?
So I initially went to Parliament, and as a backbencher, we get given the task of finding a small piece of legislation that government's not going to pick up, but that we ourselves want to work on. And it's called a Members' Bill. And I started to investigate, thinking, how can we enable the rest of the country to have this? Or how can we have a look at the systems to support these organisations to do their work? And so that was the idea. And then as I started looking into it, I realised that really we needed a much bigger response than a small members bill. And so, I instigated, I was very lucky, really supportive ministers, instigated a briefing into our select committee on food waste. Fortunately, able to get Miranda Morosa to come and be our report writer, and we investigated the situation of food waste in this country, keeping in mind under the Sustainable Development Goals that we've got a goal of getting to, I think it's 50% food waste reduction by 2030. So using that 12.3 goal. But for me, it was also about social equity as well. It was around the fact that we have food insecurity, and this was, to me, a win. So bringing down methane, helping people who had food insecurity, and making sure that food just doesn't get wasted. So
yeah.
That's how it started.
Fantastic. Congratulations on what you've achieved so far. And the New Zealand Food Waste Summit has just recently been held in the last month. It must have been very inspiring seeing the work that is going on and the initiatives that are happening, and they just need a helping hand.
Yeah, so I guess from that briefing, timing was an amazing thing. We were working on a whole pile of legislation, so the food waste briefing got sort of put back and put back and put back, just as we had time to get to the final report. And so it was tabled in the House, and we asked for Cabinet to report back to us on it, and they reported back just before COVID hit. And so timing was an amazing thing. And at that point, they realised, when all of these families were in this situation of food insecurity, that we had a network. It wasn't a perfect network, but it was a network that could support and enable people to have food. And so it just grew from there. And that's when the budget bid of the 32 million got put in place, and that's under both the environment but also MSD. And then there was another piece of work under MPI, which was 7.5 million, and that 7.5 million went towards the setting up of the infrastructure and the purchasing, the great pork purchase of COVID. Yeah.
Which you could, we were in the trenches with that at the time, Angie, and, you could argue that should have never happened as well. But COVID has created intense awareness around our food systems and our supply chains is something that we all need to be interconnected with to be able to, nourish ourselves and our communities. Yeah. So it's, unfortunately, a bit of positive timing for the work that you're doing. Do you talk there around that $7 million fund in MPI? Is there also more integrated work happening between MSD, Ministry for Social Development, and the Ministry for Primary Industries to work on these waste streams that are happening, between harvest and the manufacturers, and being able to redirect this food to where it's needed?
Yeah, I mean, I think basically it is the whole food system, right? It's right from the paddock right through. And so looking at where the opportunities are to make sure that we don't waste food and that food is picked just in time and that it goes out to the community. Some of the stuff around eating food that is not perfect, so that, for want of a better word, the ugly food movement, and also around how the supply chain works to move that food across the country, so making sure it gets there. So all of that work is, it's the way that our government tries to work, but this is a particularly good example of how we've got different and competing ministries working on something and doing it really effectively and working together. So methane reduction, people aren't going hungry, and we're making sure the food gets grown in the way that we need to.
That is exactly what we love to hear, a win-win all round. Angie, thank you so much for your time. Angie Warren Clark, my apologies, is there from an MP based in Bay of Plenty for the Labour Party, working very hard on reducing food waste here in Aotearoa, New Zealand.
One of the first things you learn when you live out here
is where to shop for the things you need to live out here.
Like electric fencing.
Or horse feed.
Or bee suits.
Children.
Chook food.
Do you want a couple of these?
Or something stylish to wear. Not everyone's got stuff like this.
But at Farmlands we do, and then some.
So if you need anything to help you farm,
Grow, milk, drench.
we're here. Come on in.
Because we're out here too.